I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker of the conference. Mike Schroepfer was the Chief Technology Officer of Meta until 2022 when he moved into a senior fellowship role there and began to dedicate the bulk of his time to climate change. He launched Gigascale Capital, which is a venture fund focused on early stage companies working to address climate change. And he's also shifted more of his focus to additional ventures, a nonprofit he co-founded in 2017, which provides funding and support for scientific research on climate solutions, among other areas. Please welcome Schroepfer to the stage now. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. As I mentioned, you were previously the CTO at Meta, and at the time, I think you were mostly focused on some of the artificial intelligence efforts, some of the content moderation efforts. I don't think I or many people would have guessed your next move would be a left hook turn into climate change. Why was it? Can you describe that sort of evolution for us?
Yeah, I mean, it was honestly a moment of reflection during COVID. You know, it was the COVID lockdowns, 2020. I think all of us had a lot of time to think. And climate was something that I'd always cared a lot about, but it honestly felt kind of overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem, and even with my sort of resources, I was like, can I actually even do anything that matters?
Yeah.
And some switch flipped, and I just said, it doesn't matter, I've got to try. It's too important. You know, we've got to leave a planet that's livable for our kids and their kids. And so I just got started. And I started on the philanthropy side, because we'd already been doing a bunch of philanthropy.
Right.
I said, look, this is something I can do on nights and weekends and continue my main job and sort of start there. And it kind of snowballed from there.
Got it. In just my time at Tech Review, I think I've been here 6 or 7 years, we've gone from basically one venture capital fund that was fully focused on climate change and clean energy to now dozens. So I'm curious, can you talk about the investment philosophy of Gigascale and what distinguishes your approach in this increasingly crowded field?
Yeah, I mean, you know, as I said, I sort of certainly didn't start off to be an investor. I kind of got there by starting on the philanthropic side and funding a bunch of science, funding a bunch of policy work, and then as I met entrepreneurs who'd heard I was doing work in climate, I found that my sort of operational skills were really helpful. You know, I'd scaled Meta from 100 people to 35,000 by the time I left. We built data centers in 18 regions around the world from one, in 2011. And so those real world building skills are really helpful. So it just kind of was a better lineup of sort of my interests. And as I got into it, I realized it was actually quite helpful to also be doing philanthropy, because I realized on the investing side, what I want to do is show people that this can be great business. This is an amazing investing opportunity. We're talking about the largest industrial transformation we've had as a society since the industrial era. We're going to re-engineer the way we produce power, distribute it, live in buildings, transport things all around the world, and grow food. That's it. Besides that, nothing's going to change.
Just all those things. Right.
So that's going to be a massive disruption. Disruption equals a lot of opportunity for investors. So the primary thing we look for is what we like to call the green discount.
Okay.
There's this thing called the green premium. I got to pay more for the good stuff. It's like, nah, technology disruption is fundamentally about bringing a cheaper product to market. In this case, that also happens to be lower carbon. And those are the investments we look for. And I don't have enough hours in the day to meet all the amazing entrepreneurs who are pursuing technologies that hit exactly that bullseye.
I mean, Bill Gates' entire book is about the green premium and how so much of the work that they're trying to do at Breakthrough Energy Ventures is help to sort of scale up and drive down the cost of these various things a little bit further along the decarbonization timeline, green cement and steel. So I'm curious, what would be some examples of what you're talking about where there are products or opportunities where you can come in and create a lower cost product, a better product that's also lower emissions?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about things that are at the tail end of that curve, so it's easy to see kind of where we end up, and that's really like solar and lithium-ion batteries right now. There's going to be $500 billion in grid-scale solar this year alone, and that's because it's the cheapest form of energy production we have, because of mass production and scale.
Right.
Massive, power law cost down. Lithium-ion batteries introduced into the market in 1991. That's only 30-something years ago. Since then, they've gone down in price by 97%. Nothing in the world does that except technology. This is what makes electric vehicles soon cost competitive in lifetime analysis with gas vehicles, electric aviation, electric shipping, all sorts of other things. And so that's the enabling technology. And so what I'm looking at is enabling technologies that are on similar cost curves, but a little earlier in the S-curve. And one example of that is the electrolyzer cell, the ability to use electrochemistry in order to create a chemical reaction. We've seen 80 to 90% reductions in cost in those in the last 10 to 20 years. And so one company we invested in called Dioxycle is basically taking industrial waste emissions and turning it into useful products. In this case, ethylene, which is a common chemical used in things like PVC pipes, probably in this building. And they, at scale, should be able to produce that chemical cheaper than the existing way of producing that chemical, which is a thermochemical reaction where you burn a fossil fuel to sort of crack the molecules and make the chemical you're trying to make. So that's an example of electrochemistry, which is a technology platform and a specific product and company that's leveraging that advancement in order to produce a product that at scale should be cheaper than the sort of existing way of making it.
Breaking down carbon and creating low emissions fuels or chemicals out of that is a very hard problem of engineering and science that very smart people have been working on for a long time. It's become a pretty crowded space, and I've reported on some amount of overpromise and under-delivering in that space so far. So what about that particular company convinced you that these people were on a track where they could do this in an economical, competitive way?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, timing really matters. I started my first company in 2000, and we bought our network gear from another failed company called Webvan, which was a grocery delivery company.
I remember
founded
them well.
by Sequoia Capital, who was our investor, with same person on the board. People may have seen the Instacart, $15 billion company doing the same business. So we didn't have the platform technologies, in that case, smartphone penetration, to make that product work at the time. So timing matters, and I think part of it is we're at the right part of the cost curve in this particular technology.
Okay.
The team really matters. This is a team that is, commercializing a bunch of technology out of Stanford, and they are taking the approach that I think matters, which is an obsessive focus on sort of iteration speed and cost of production. It isn't one single breakthrough, but it just, and this is the magic of tech that I think we can bring to clean tech is asking why. So when you go and buy a membrane from a supplier, they say it costs X dollars per meter. Why does it cost that much? What is it made of? Can I make it cheaper? And it turns out in many cases you can make it a lot cheaper if you just do that. And so not accepting any of the sort of existing things, but looking for first principles and having a team that's like willing and able to do that. And this, a lot of what we're doing is finding, founder hunting. We're looking for great founders who are willing to do it. And this team just blew us away in terms of their ability, and we're at the right part of the cost curve to make it happen.
Cool. I'm kind of curious, what do you have, how are you as a venture capitalist and someone with a more traditional IT tech background vetting these kind of things? Do you have a scientific board? Are you leaning on scientific advisors? These are complex areas, and I'm just kind of curious who you're leaning on for that kind of help.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we have in-house expertise. So one of our members of the investing team is a PhD in chemistry from Cambridge and founded a biotech startup. So she can do a lot of the diligence in-house, and then we have a network of experts, to work in a variety of different areas. The challenge, the joy and challenge of ClimateTech is, we're talking about electrochemical cells. We're also, looking at vaccines of different sorts. We're home electrification, consumer electronics. So it really, you have to have a staple of experts in your network that you can pull in to look at battery chemistry, which is very different than electrochemistry, which is very different than, some of the other technologies we're talking about.
Yeah. When we were doing our prep call, you stated clearly that you are an optimist about our ability to deal with these problems, that you try to maintain a sort of a positive attitude about these things, but you did mention a couple things that bug you in the space. One of the things you said bugs you in the space is when people argue for excluding technologies from the potential portfolio of solutions. Why is that? And are there any particular categories that you think we're likely to need that get beat up unfairly?
Okay, now the hard part of the conversation. This is where I lose friends and make enemies. But, as an entrepreneur and as someone who's built a lot of new things, for anyone who's done that, it's an incredibly difficult journey, and it's filled with people telling you can't and no.
Yeah.
And what we're going to require to solve the climate crisis is building and deploying a lot of new stuff. And so I think we need a lot more yeses than nos. And I think the challenge with sort of shouting down a particular technique is anyone working in adjacent areas sort of hears that and might get dissuaded from sort of working on it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the challenge. We need less like stop energy and more positive energy on these things. The second part of your question is like, what things should we not be doing, or what things that people?
I'm not saying what should we not do. I'm saying what should we be doing that some people are saying we should not be doing.
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges is there's an argument that basically says that the optimal thing to do with any new renewable electron is to displace coal. And like that is correct. If you look at the curve and you say, if I can retire a coal power plant and replace it with renewable energies, that's by far the most optimal thing you can do. And so the arguments then follows, you should like do that before you do anything else.
Yeah.
And like the first part's right and the second part isn't, because there's a bunch of technologies like carbon capture and sequestration, which is really necessary because we have a bunch of really hard to abate sectors.
Yeah.
I still don't know technologically how you're going to fly across an ocean without some sort of fuel that we are either producing or using. So that's going to require some sort of carbon capture to offset the carbon emissions at fuel burn time at a minimum, unless we're going to stop transatlantic air travel.
Yeah.
And those technologies often take a long time to bake. You can make a similar argument about the nuclear industry, which is, hey, renewables are going to solve the problem. Let's not spend any time there. And those things take 10 years to build a next generation reactor or fusion or whatever it may be. But I think of it as, we need options on the table, which is like if fusion hits, this whole new technological tree opens up in terms of our ability to use power to do interesting things. So as a society, like we should be investing in that, in addition to all of these other things. So I'm sort of more of a yes and person rather than stop doing this thing and do this other thing, because that's just not likely the way we're going to solve this problem. It's not one thing, it's like a whole lot of things happening all at once.
Right. You and I both on Twitter last night, X, asked potential audience members or folks on Twitter, what should we be talking about today? And one of the areas that came up were small modular nuclear reactors. And you seem to say that you think that is a very important area. And you mentioned that it's not just being talked about to produce electricity for the grid, but also for some industrial use cases. So I was curious, is that an area you have invested in, or an area that you're actively exploring at this point?
We haven't invested, but it is an area of interest of mine. I think if you look at, people often talk about electrification. If we just talk about like replacing the way we make current electrons, that's actually a small part of our overall energy use. When you talk about total energy use, a lot of it is used in industrial applications, which are producing a lot of gas we're burning to make heat. And if you want to electrify that part, you need to almost double our electrical generation, maybe more. And so SMRs could be a way, particularly for process heat. They're particularly good at that, process heat and electricity. And I think I linked in there, Dow Chemical talked about how they're going to try to build a plant in the Gulf Coast with an SMR there, for this exact reason. So again, in the yes and category of like, I don't think it's the singular solution, but I think it's another solution we can put on the board for high power, high heat in a particular location, which has particular use for industry and other things like that.
And then I think even more recently, we saw Microsoft talking about potentially using SMRs for some of their data centers and AI efforts as well. So we are seeing some interesting use cases emerge there. I think one of the takeaways from the CleanTech 1.0 era was that the Silicon Valley VC business model wasn't always the right fit for this space, that these were not software plays and apps that you could sort of quickly scale up and that you could do some quick exits on. These are often early stage, hard tech, hardware problems that take a lot of capital to scale up and don't pay off quickly often. Do you think the VC sector this cycle has absorbed some of those lessons and put some of them to work? Do you feel like you have?
I mean, it's hard for me to speak for the whole sector. I think some have not.
Okay.
I think it requires...
Tell us who didn't.
What's that? That's later at the after party. I think it requires patience. I don't fully buy into the you can't get the same kind of returns, because again, when you think about the assets we're replacing in the world, you think about the energy market. If there's a good energy storage application, it's like $1 trillion market. So these are massive opportunities for people. It does, however, take time. Like this is not a 3-year quick flip. It's 10 to 15 to 18 years. It does take a lot of capital, and so what we look for is, partners and companies who are creative about the capital stack.
Yeah.
Capital comes in all forms. Equity investment is one. Non-dilutive grants from the government is another. Non-dilutive investments, loan, debt vehicles. I think it's a lot more creative in how you finance that than just A round, B round, C round, okay, IPO. It's a lot more complicated, and I think you've got to go into that knowing that. But once you do, I think these opportunities are tremendous.
Yeah. One of the other startups you're invested in is Mill, which turns residential food scraps into chicken feed. They're providing customers this sort of dehydrating bin and then picking up waste each week. It's a $45 a month service. Tell us what attracted you to that company.
Again, starts with the founder, Matt Rogers, founder of Nest. Everyone knows Nest Camera. Both an amazing product person and an amazing person. This is not a company I wanted to invest in, but I took a meeting with Matt because I liked him so much. And the more I went through the pitch, I was just blown away by the scope and scale of the problem we're talking about.
Yeah.
Food waste is a large component on your landfill, and residential food waste is actually the largest source of food waste. It's a huge source of emissions. It rots in the landfill and makes methane. So that's the problem we're attacking.
Yeah.
There's no real good solution out there right now. Most people, how many in the audience have residential compost? Have a green bin outside? Okay. So even in this room, which is a highly selective room, that was less than half, right? U.S. Post Office delivers and picks up from 99.9% of households in the United States. The output of the mill is a shoebox size set of dried grounds that can be picked up anywhere in the United States. And the pitch to the consumer, which is the most important part when we talk about green discount, is why am I going to buy this thing?
Yeah.
Let me ask you a different question, audience participation. How many of you enjoy taking out your trash? Favorite activity for anyone? Would you like to take it out less? Right? And why do you take out your trash? Because it's full and or it stinks, right? The largest component of trash is food waste, and the reason why it stinks is it's rotting in your kitchen, right? The same methane that's going in that landfill. And what Mill does is you put it in this little bin, it grinds it up, dries it out, and compacts it. Doesn't stink. You can run it for a couple of weeks before you have to empty it out. So to the consumer, it's less stinky, smelly trash. And then you get a win of less methane, and then you get a double win of that gets turned into chicken feed, so you're offsetting food production for animals. So to me, again, this is the example of good product design and technology sort of doing a win-win for consumer or business and the climate.
Yeah. I think the critique of climate products in that category is that they may only appeal to a relatively well-to-do set of sort of niche of consumers. That this is not to say that it won't work as a business, but it might not scale to meaningful levels because most people aren't going to pay 3 times their Netflix bill to deal with their compost. So I guess as a climate investor, how do you kind of think about the balance between the profit motives, the ability for a startup to succeed, and the emissions motives?
Yeah, I think about this as what is the scale of the, all of these are hopefully power law curves, decreases in cost, and what does the scale opportunity at this part of that curve, when we're in 30 years or 20 years into it. For Mill, for example, you're right. Not everyone in the US is going to pay that much. But not everyone bought a Tesla Roadster, but that was their first product because there was a market of people who are willing to pay a premium. There is a market of people who are willing to pay a premium, who are climate conscious, who will enjoy this product and advocate it to their friends. That's how you start financing the business in the beginning. So the first 100,000 or 1 million customers of this will probably be that climate conscious consumer who's going to have a better experience and tell all their friends about how this amazing thing is.
Yeah.
Then what you do is you start costing down the device. So that's an easy thing to do. Having built consumer electronics myself, being able to reduce the COGS on this is a fairly straightforward process, and Matt knows how to do it. And then what you start looking at is, what's the opportunity for municipalities?
Yeah.
Well, they're driving these trucks around to pick up your green bin that's usually empty. That's an incredibly expensive and wasteful thing. If you say, maybe the municipalities can help to sponsor something like this, instead of driving trucks around, we have little shoebox size things. It is a much more efficient thing. There are already partnerships going on with municipalities around the world, around the country, who will explore piloting this. And if you just think of it from first principles, I take this big bin of undifferentiated, big, wet, heavy stuff, and I take it in a truck to a central facility to do something. Option A is how we currently do it.
Yeah.
Or at home, with a little bit of energy, I compact it down to this dried, very small, compact thing that's 80% of the weight, 80% lighter, and then I do something with it, distributed, basically, compaction and drying. That is clearly the right way to do this.
Yeah.
Just from a first principle spin. That was the other thing that attracted me with the business. That's definitely how we should solve this problem.
Yeah.
And so whether it's Mill or someone else, I believe that's the way we're going to deal with compost in 20 years.
Okay.
And so I think that's why it will scale.
Okay. And so I just want to clarify, you're saying Mill is having conversations with municipal utilities
Yes.
about partnering with them in some way to do that?
Yeah, to
pickup
sponsor,
part
to
of
help
it,
offset
so
the
it can,
cost for their, like at
scale
the end
up
of the
at a
day,
faster-
they're paying money
Yeah.
to drive these trucks around. For example, if that municipality, instead of driving the truck around every week, could drive it around every other week,
Yeah.
even to pick up your trash, because your trash is now a lot smaller, that saves that municipality a ton of money.
Yeah.
They can then use that money to help offset the cost of the composting in the home. So I think there's plenty of opportunities to make this scale to the consumer because the cost of the consumers are going to be very low,
Right.
at scale.
Okay.
But we're bootstrapping it now.
I want to mention now to our live, in-person and online audience, if you have questions, please start thinking of them. We will have people coming around with microphones. And for online, you can submit questions through the online system, and we will look for those, and they'll be beamed up to me on stage here. Talk about the important. I mentioned in the intro that you also co-founded Additional Ventures. In general, why is it important in your mind to attack this problem both from the sort of venture investor side as well as the charitable nonprofit?
That's a great question. I mean, I believe very much in right tool for the job, right? And you think about problems of policy, problems of early stage science where the commercialization potential is unclear. That is a great place for nonprofits and governments to act. Yeah. And this is where we can do a lot of good in that world. Once you get to something where we can be attacking a multi-$100 billion market, that's the place where you can tap into the capital markets, and that's how we scale.
Yeah.
SpaceX did 82 rocket launches in the last year. Growing up, we used to look at the space shuttle. They did about 4 launches a year.
Yeah.
So when you can get industry into something, and then they have the ability to massively scale these things. And so that's the way I think about it. It's like scaling things that are profitable on the venture side and sort of helping to move policy or early stage science where it's just a public good coming out the other end from the nonprofit side.
Okay. I may have not said it, but if you do have a question, please raise your hand and someone will come by with a microphone. Looks like maybe someone already. Yes, go ahead, you in the back, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, this is Sanjay Rajan. I live in Boulder, Colorado.
Hey.
And I work in consulting around sustainable solutions. So I found the Mill product pretty interesting because of its whole concept of circular economy. It's not just thinking in terms of just selling a product, taking it all the way. So I'm curious in terms of the VC model and how much investments are going into such business models that enable for a full circular way of looking at how products go from start to sort of back into the system. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there are some actually VC firms who specialize this. One is actually called Closed Loop Partners that look specifically in that space. I don't think we look at anything like that as a way to sort of save costs or make a better product experience. And certainly, if you don't throw something away and have to remake it, in theory, you ought to be able to find a way to do that much cheaper, by reusing and recycling, assuming you can figure out the logistics problem, which is where a lot of these things are challenging, is I've got to go pick up something at a consumer's house and bring it back to a central warehouse of some sort. So I think it is a really challenging, space for that reason. But when you look at things like Mill, where the actual pickup is very small and relatively light, I think it works quite well.
I will go back to one of my questions, and then we'll come back to audience. So yeah, the main climate area that Additional Ventures has focused on so far, at least to my understanding, is ocean alkalinity enhancement. This idea that we can add alkaline substances to the ocean in various ways, through various techniques, and basically nudge the oceans to draw down and store away even more carbon than they already are. Why did you decide to dedicate your time and money to that particular area?
Yeah, this was, I got the benefit of, as I said, sort of focusing on this area during the COVID crisis. And so I got to do a newbie view of climate, a learner's mind of just let me go through the 101, the basics. For anyone new to climate, there's a lot of words that get thrown around that you are used to, but other people are confused. Adaptation, mitigation, what is sink sources, like all these things that people just throw around. But as a new person, just really understanding it. And again, looking at it first principles and looking at the sources and sinks map and going through this, very quickly came to the conclusion, as we discussed earlier, that we're going to need some ways, even if we stopped emissions today, like got to zero 2023, we kind of need to undo a bunch of the damage we've already done. We've effectively been polluting for a really long time, and we need pollution cleanup. So you're talking about pollution cleanup, removing carbon from the atmosphere. It's very challenging to do that at cost and at scale. It's a trace gas, it's very expensive, it requires a lot of energy. And so as we're looking through that, the ocean gives you a couple benefits. The first is it's the place where a lot of it ends up anyway. There's a natural exchange of carbon dioxide into the ocean. This is actually generally bad because it's contributing to ocean acidification and finds its way into the ocean and turns into carbonic acid and is lowering the pH of the ocean. But there is a natural counteracting force to this. As rain hits rocks, those rocks, find their way into the ocean. Those rocks are naturally alkaline. Again, big word, but if you've ever taken a Tums, because he had an upset acid stomach, alkalinity is effectively the chemical process that buffers or interacts with and neutralizes an acid. So here we have the components of a little bit of alkalinity in the water and neutralizes some of the acid. You then increase the ability of the ocean to uptake, more CO2 from the atmosphere. So the concept behind this is quite simple. It's like, this is happening right as we're discussing, this is happening. The question is, it's happening at sort of a geological scale, not enough time to help, my kids or their kids. Can we speed it up a little bit? And this is a scientific question. Again, back to where philanthropy is good. We haven't done any large-scale field trials. Done a lot of stuff in the lab. We know it works. Question is, what happens when you do it in the real world? And that is a thing that you need to have clear science with no commercial motive attached to it. And that was sort of why we started going down that path.
Okay. It's interesting. I've written a lot about various approaches to carbon removal over the last few years, and any area you look at, there are usually big pluses and some big minuses. I think the big pluses with that particular approach is you get the double whammy of the oceans both suck it down and store it away.
Yes.
One of the downsides is the oceans are a dynamic, continually moving, continually in flux system. So measuring the carbon removal is very difficult. Even if generally we can think that we've added X amount of substance, we think it'll be about this. Just knowing for sure in any given part of the world under certain weather conditions and temperature conditions and acidity conditions, like it can just vary quite a bit. So I believe that part of the effort that you've recently launched, Carbon to Sea, is designed to set up some field trials. Is the MRV aspect of that, the measurement, verification, reporting part of the goal? Trying to figure out how to do that in a more reliable way.
Yeah, you nailed it, and I buried the lead on this, which is the reason this is interesting. Is it is massively scalable, and if it works, is likely the cheapest form of carbon removal out there. Sub $50 a ton, and it's very permanent, 1,000+ years of storage. In a very well understood fashion. The downside, as you said, is it's hard in the open versus a tank, where if we try this, get a tank of seawater and seal the top of it, you can run the experiment like, yep, it sequesters carbon. What happens when I do this in the open ocean? Does it fall to the bottom of the ocean? The alkalinity? Is there other interactions that we don't understand? This is what we need to go out and measure, and this is what we're doing science in the field right now to sort of better answer these questions. And if we were 20 years ago, this is where I think watching technological foundations is really important in getting timing right. That's what a lot of I spend my time on. 20 or 30 years ago, we didn't have good computer models that could model flows in a basin. We didn't have sensors that we had any ability to manufacture cheaply. If you think about it now, it's like, yep, I can put sensors on autonomous buoys and measure what's happening in real time. I can then build a fairly complicated computer model of the particular, in this particular waterway, what's the fluxes and flows and where is this stuff going to go. I can use all that hopefully to build, within some probability, 20, 30% probability distribution. If we do this, this is what happens. Because we're talking months, not years of sort of interaction time. So it's tractable. I think it's achievable. But again, we have to do what I'm looking for is the multiple peer-reviewed papers doing this work in multiple areas around the world, saying, yep, first of all, it's safe. No issues that we've encountered. And second of all, here's the model on if you do this, then the following things happen to the ocean and to the atmosphere. I think that's tractable in the next few years.
Okay. I think we have another question in the back here.
Thank you for this wonderful dialogue. My name is Yasemin Sırali. I'm Director of ESG at the FIBA Group, which is a diversified group of companies based in Istanbul, Turkey. My question, Mike, to you is there a way for small investors who are fascinated by these progressive climate tech companies to invest and become a part of this ride beyond the institutional investors or private investors such as yourself with the higher means? Thank you.
That's a great question, and I don't have a good answer for you off the top of my head. I'll have to come back to it. I know that there are sometimes, angels list groups and others that allow you to do it. MCJ is a group of folks that started as a podcast, My Climate Journey, that had a rolling fund that you could invest relatively small amounts into, and so that may still be open as an option for you. But there are also some smaller micro funds out there. But follow up with me on one of the platforms, and we'll see if I can come up with some better leads for you. Thank you for the question.
I'm hearing. I'm sorry. We'll come back. I'm hearing more and more stories like yours, where people that are in the sort of tech industry are moving into climate tech for similar reasons to you, just like the concern about the state of the world, concern about ultimate sustainability effects on our kids, and all these other things. I'm curious how you think that expertise, some of the hard-won lessons of Silicon Valley, can be best applied to the climate problem. And you had mentioned this idea of hyperscaling when we were talking ahead of this conference.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dirty secret is a climate company is still a company. It's a group of humans trying to accomplish a task. And most of the hard stuff is actually not the technology part. It's the, how do I build a company? How do I get office space? How do I get lab space? How do I recruit? Okay, now we used to be 10 people and everyone knew everything, and now we're 50 people and everyone's complaining they don't know what the roadmap is. Like, how do I manage an all hands? How do I do a staff meeting? So the number of calls that I take that are basically that, very basic, and I mean it in the best, like, I love coaching people on these things, because like what I want to do is save you 6 months of trial and error and say like, no, okay, at 25 people, here's how you organize things, here's how you do a staff meeting, here's how you recruit, like, let's move on and work on the hard problems. And so I think it's everything from scaling an organization. As I said, when I joined Meta, it was about a 100-person team. When I left last year, it was a 35,000-person team. I started a company from 0 to 60, so I've seen 0 to 35,000. So I can talk you through sort of every increment of scale of people. And then again, we built our first data center in 2011. Built 10 years later, we had 18 in operation all around the world. And so I've seen 10 to 20x scale and facility size in a decade. And so what does it take to do the first one? It was just very different than doing 10 in parallel. And so just being able to walk people through all of those problems and be there to help them be like, I remember when we had that problem, here's how you manage it, is a lot of honestly, the fun part. This is sort of, I didn't intend to do this, but why I'm doing it, because like every time I get in the room with an entrepreneur, I'm like, if you're successful, you're gonna have a huge impact in climate. I'm happy to spend my Saturday coaching you on whatever you need. And that's when I realized this is really what I want to do.
Got it, great. I think we have another question back here.
Yeah, hi there. Andy McFarlane, Head of Climate at AXA XL, property and casualty insurer. We're obviously all here because we believe technology has a role to play. We've seen the advances that technology has made in terms of reducing the pace of increase, but emissions are still going up. A couple of questions. One, do you believe that technology can solve the problem on its own? And two, we know that behavioral change is a big part of what needs to happen to sort of reduce the consumption that we have as a society. And do you think technology has a role to play in that as well?
Yeah. I want to be clear that I don't think, I'm not a singular solution person. So I don't think technology is the singular solution to the problem. I think it is a very massive necessary component. But we need policy, we need people's individual behavior to work on this thing too. Part of why I'm so excited about technology is it sort of makes problems easier. When you have a 97% cost reduction, when something just becomes the cheapest option, you then don't have to make hard trade-offs. Most people on the planet, we're a lucky group in this room, are just trying to get by, feed their families, deal with their lives. We should not be burdening them now with the climate crisis. What we should do is, if you have the means and the capability and the interest, change your own, be the first subscriber of Mill or whatever to help get these companies down the cost curve so that 10 years later, for other people, it's the cheapest option for them in order to do this. It makes their trash pickup cheaper. It makes their PVC pipes cheaper because it's produced in a low carbon way. And technology is the only thing I've ever seen in my reading of history that like massively reduces cost and increases prosperity. And so that's where I'm sort of focusing my time and energy. But we need policy, we need government intervention, we need people who have the means to act so that we can sort of build a good future for those who don't have the means to act.
I started off by talking about the IRA and the infrastructure law and some of these other climate policies that are poised to pour just a massive amount of money, mainly through tax credits, into the clean energy space. How have those policies changed the investor landscape, changed the landscape for some of the companies you're talking to or funding?
Yeah, I think it's a massive accelerant. So, I got into this before all of those passed, but I think it's giving a bunch of people optimism. And practically speaking, a lot of these companies end up, you do a pilot plant, and then I need to do a first commercial plant. You're going to be doing a $10 to $100 million facility. And financing that when there's some technical risk, we've never built one of these things before, is a big challenge for people. And so getting, government funding to back that really, really helps. And we'll get more of these projects off the ground. So I think it's a massive accelerant.
Okay. We have 53 seconds. Let's do one last question here.
Hey, this is Schroepfer Talati. I'm currently at Meta, actually, working on our VR products. I think you guys are touched upon two things that are quite interesting to me. One is if you are thinking about the technology, it follows a power law curve, and you can say from first principles maybe predict where it will go down. And I think technologies that or products that actually work in that, say you said solar or lab-produced meat, they will just make logical sense for everybody to use that. How do you think about given the time scale is 10, 15 years for the return to be net positive potentially, what policy changes might actually change that where the power law today might be above and there might be a carbon premium, but in 10 years the market will look different, so the opportunity is now much larger because we expect policy to change? And how do you think about how policy plays a role in the investment?
Yeah, I think policy plays, it's a great point. And I think policy can play two roles. One is, if you're on a power law curve, you can left shift it. So we can get to that point where it's economically viable for more people faster. And that's a dramatic thing. There's another, what you're talking about is a binary change, which is a whole area doesn't make sense for anyone to invest in because it's so far up that power law curve that you just can't imagine getting there in any reasonable time. And so this is where sort of early R&D grants, early subsidies, and others can help you get there. And I think, my reading of technological development, whether it's the space industry, the lithium-ion battery, integrated circuits, it was usually a collaboration of some form of government help and funding in the beginning in the national labs and subsidies and others, universities and corporations. So this is a all of the above strategy where we need all of these things working in harmony and using the right tool for the right job to get it done. And again, the more we can do that, the more sort of shots on goal we have. That, if we have a low-cost carbon removal technology, and some new forms of power generation and ways to solve industrial heat, we got more consumers adopting heat pumps. It just gives us more options to sort of play this game out, and that's a huge hope for the future.
All right, I am sad to report that is our time, but thank you so much for taking the time and
thank you all very
here.
much.
I really appreciate it.